Welcome back. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about a very important tool called as Docker Compose. What is this Docker Compose tool and why we need it? Let us see with an example. Assume that this is my machine where I have Docker installed. I want a network to be created first. Let's assume the network name is Siva Net, which is a bridge network. Then I want to start MySQL container and I want this MySQL container to be attached to this network. Also, I want a volume on the host to be mounted onto this container so that whatever data this MySQL database is writing, it will be written to the volume so that even if container crashes, my data will not be lost. This is my requirement. And then I have one more application, customer REST application, which we used earlier. I want it to run in another container and I want it to be part of same network. And also I want customer REST to connect to MySQL. Okay. And this customer REST is actually exposing a port 8080. I want port forwarding to be configured on my host at 30080. This is my requirement. So first, what all steps I need to do is I need to create a volume by executing a command called as docker volume create command. I need to create the network, whatever I wanted. Then I need to start uh, MySQL container by passing all the configuration. Once this is done, I need to start customer REST container and expose it on port 30080. Oh, there are too many commands I need to execute for starting all these containers. Will it not be good if I can do all this using a single command? Yes, that is where Docker Compose can help us. So Docker Compose can read from a configuration file, which is a nothing but YAML file, a file with extension .yaml. We can describe about our containers in this Docker Compose YAML file. Each container is considered to be a service. I'll show you how I can write this YAML file and describe about all my services. I will show you with an example. See here, I have written a file with name docker-compose.yml. The file name can be anything, but the default name is docker-compose.yml. The first line says that we are using Docker Compose version 2. There is version 1 as well, the old version, but I want to say that I want to use version 2. Then all the containers I have to describe under services. Before that, if I want to create a volume, I have to specify volumes and name of my volume. And if I want to create a network also, I can create a networks and under that another network. Right now, I didn't create the network. We'll see what will happen if I don't specify a network name. So volume I created, just giving a name like this will create a volume. Okay. Then here I'm describing about MySQL container. The image to be used is MySQL and I want to mount a volume, MySQL volume, whatever I described here onto /var/lib/MySQL. And if I want to pass any environment variables under environment, I'm configuring all the key value pairs. Volumes is a list. You can see whenever you see something like dash in this syntax, it can be a list. I can mount multiple volumes also by writing like this. Suppose a volume X under /var/lib/x. I can do like this as well. Okay, fine. Now I described about how I want my container, MySQL container to be started using these options. Similarly, I want customer REST. Here in this case for this particular customer REST service, first of all, I want to build an image. To build an image, I'm telling what is a folder where a Docker file is present and the dependencies are present. So in my current folder where I have Docker Compose, I have a folder with name customer service. Is it the same? So using the files under this folder, a build has to happen. By default, it will look for a file with name Docker file. And in this Docker file, whatever information is required to build my jar, build a image for my application, I have written. So this customer service is in the same folder as Docker Compose, the current file. So here I'm saying build using this contents of this folder. And also I'm using depends on. See, I don't want customer REST container to start before MySQL. Once MySQL container is started and it is ready, then only I want the container for customer REST to be created. So I can specify depends on. So I can give a list of all containers which this container depends on. Then I'm giving an environment variable my profile as prod and ports. I want to expose 8080 on 30080. Like that, in a single YAML file, we can describe all about all of our services. There are other options also, which we can actually see in the documentation. So in Docker Compose documentation, this is a file which contains entire documentation about various options. So actually, I don't want to go through all the options, and it is really not required to know all the options. You need to understand the concept. Whenever you are writing a Docker Compose YAML file, you can see whatever is needed. But whatever I gave is the most important things to be known. This is sufficient. Mostly nowadays, people are not using Docker Compose. We will be actually using some other tools on top of Docker, like Kubernetes or Docker Swarm. Mostly, we won't be using Docker Compose. So these minimal options are sufficient. Okay. Now, once Docker Compose YML file is there, let us see. Sorry, I'll just. Okay. See here, I'm inside that Docker Compose folder. If I list, I can see Docker Compose.yml and also my customer REST. Okay. So Docker PS, let us see. There is nothing. Docker PS dash A, I want to remove everything. Docker rm dash f DDA 539. Okay. Uh, DDA actually, or just DD. Fine. Now Docker PS dash A, nothing. Fine. Now I'm in the same folder where I have Docker Compose. I'm simply executing Docker dash compose space up. That's all. See, it created various things. Let me explain you. By default, it is using some defaults. I'll explain you step by step. Let us wait. Yeah. Now you can see creating Docker Compose MySQL, creating Docker Compose Custrust 1. These are the names of the containers. Attaching Docker Compose MySQL underscore 1 and Docker Compose REST underscore 1. These two are attached to this terminal, right? Then it is starting MySQL, then it is starting Custrust 1. Okay, now in another terminal, let me start my other terminal. Mm, I want you to see in my other terminal, I want to see all the processes. Docker PS. Yes, you can see there are Docker Compose underscore Custrust and uh, and MySQL Docker Compose MySQL. Now Docker volumes. If I see, sorry, Docker volume ls. If I see, is there Siva MySQL volume? Actually, what is the name of the volume? Mm, let me go there. Um, What is the name of the volume? MySQL Vol. Okay, is it there in the volumes? MySQL, yeah, Docker Compose underscore MySQL Vol. It is prefixing the current folder name. 03 Docker Compose is a current folder name and volume with this name is created. Right. I'll say Docker network ls. See, it created a network with name uh, default prefixed with the current folder. So network is created of type bridge and all the containers are attached to the same network. So like that, just by using a simple command docker compose up, I was able to make all the services up. So like that, there are commands like docker compose, stop, etc. to actually stop all the containers, etc. So that's about Docker Compose. It's a simple tool which reads a YML file and just by using a single command, if I've described all my services, suppose if I describe 10 services here, all the services will be started just by executing Docker Compose up command. So that's all you need to know. And I hope you understood everything, whatever I was explaining. You're able to visualize whatever I was explaining. And our journey on Docker stops here. Actually, nowadays in real applications, nobody uses Docker alone. We use Docker in combination with Docker Swarm or Docker or Kubernetes, etc. So to take your learning to next level, you can actually start your journey on Kubernetes. You don't need to know anything else on Docker than whatever I have told. Of course, in Docker, there are a lot of other configurations also. In the documentation, there will be a lot of options. We don't need to know. Whatever options you need to know, whatever is required for you to visualize. I hope I have given everything. Thank you. And please don't forget to give rating for this course. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed. Please encourage me by giving your rating. And if you have any concerns, write a query to me. I'll be happy to answer your queries. Thank you. And that's the end of this course.